Welcome to Twilight Tale, a quiet place where history drifts gently into sleep. Tonight, we travel back thousands of years to the warm river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, a land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where the first cities quietly rose and ordinary people lived simple, rhythmic lives. In this softly boring journey, we'll explore how ancient Mesopotamians slept, what they ate, and how they worked, day after slow, sun-baked day. There's nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to imagine clearly. Just let the words flow past you as your mind begins to rest. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow history to lull you gently toward sleep. Before the sun remembers its duty, before birds rehearse their first breath of sound, there is a courtyard held in shadow. Clay walls curve inward, warmed by yesterday's light, now cooling as the night loosens its grip. The air is still, but not empty. It carries the quiet weight of centuries, the hush that gathers where many lives have paused at once. Somewhere within this enclosed square of earth and sky, a body rests beneath woven blankets, unseen, unnamed, listening. It is said that this was where sleep was learned, not as an instinct, not as collapse, but as a practice, a ritual, a slow surrender taught by stone and darkness. In ancient Mesopotamia, sleep did not arrive abruptly. It was invited. It was prepared for, like a guest who might bring gifts or warnings, who might whisper truths better left veiled. The courtyard breathes. The walls remember heat. The ground holds the echo of bare feet from the day before. As the sleeper exhales, the city softens around them. Distant fires dim, voices fade into dust, and even the river seems to lower its voice. Night becomes a shared agreement. Beneath the silence, sleep begins its careful work. Here, rest was not an escape from life, but a crossing within it, a smaller death rehearsed each night. The body remained, heavy and warm, but something else was believed to loosen. Whispers tell us that the soul, marked by the moon, could slip its tether and wander gently beyond the ribs, not far, not forever, just far enough to listen. Dreams were not random, they were visitors. They arrived on moonlit dust, carried through unseen chambers, passing through the veils between gods and breath. A dream might be a blessing, a warning, or a riddle folded inside another riddle. To sleep was to open a gate without knowing who might pass through. So the Mesopotamians prepared. Beds were placed with care, not merely where the air was cool, but where spirits were less likely to linger. Mats were aligned with walls, away from thresholds where wandering forces might pause. Amulets lay hidden beneath pillows. Names of protective gods were murmured softly, not spoken aloud, for some names carried weight even in darkness. It is said that certain prayers were whispered only at night, when the world could hear without interrupting. Clay tablets, now cracked and quiet, still bear faint marks of these concerns. In their grooves lie fears and hopes pressed into wet earth, records of bad dreams, of sickness following restless nights, of omens that arrived while eyes were closed. Some tablets speak gently of divine guidance found in sleep, others warn of shadows that crept too close. Contradiction lived here too. Dreams were longed for and feared in equal measure. To dream deeply was to be chosen or targeted. No one was entirely certain. Sleep was sacred because it was uncertain. It required trust. As the night deepened, the courtyard became a chamber of listening. Above, stars arranged themselves without explanation, ancient and indifferent. Below, the sleeper's breath formed a quiet rhythm, a fragile tether holding soul to body. Each inhale a promise of return, each exhale a letting go. Where memory fades, belief steps in. The gods who guarded sleep were not always named clearly. Some had faces worn smooth by time. Others existed only as functions, watchers, wardens of thresholds, keepers of the in-between. They were etched into stone and clay, but more often into habit, into the way lamps were dimmed slowly, never extinguished all at once, into the way children were hushed with stories of stars that listened. Sleep was a dialogue, not a silence. Within it, the soul was believed to travel softly, careful not to stray too far. To wander recklessly was dangerous. To linger too long risked forgetting the path back. Death itself was imagined as a sleep from which one did not wake, and so each night became practice, each dawn a return. This belief lent sleep its weight. It was not taken lightly. It was respected. Yet there was tenderness here as well. In the coolness before dawn, sleep was a comfort, a familiar descent into darkness that had always released them back into light. Parents watched children's chests rise and fall, counting breaths like prayers. Elders slept lightly, aware of how thin the veil had become for them. Marked by the moon, every sleeper carried both vulnerability and grace. Outside the courtyard, the city lay layered in quiet. Roofs and alleys dissolved into shadow. Somewhere a dog stirred. Somewhere else a fire sighed itself into embers. Time slowed, stretched thin, almost transparent. In this hour, the boundary between the living and the remembered softened. Ancestors were thought to pass near, curious but restrained. The dead were not gone, they were elsewhere, watching through different eyes. Sleep allowed a brief alignment of worlds. Beneath the silence, this was understood without words. The sleeper turns slightly beneath the blankets. A dream shifts its shape. Perhaps it is only fragments, a field, a voice, a door that will not open. Or perhaps it is something heavier, something that will be carried into waking life and weighed against reality. Clay records tell us that dreams were interpreted carefully, sometimes days later, sometimes never. Some were sealed away in memory, considered too dangerous to share. Others were brought to priests, unfolded like delicate cloth, examined for meaning. Yet even interpretation was uncertain. The gods did not always speak clearly. Sometimes they contradicted themselves. Sometimes they remained silent. And so sleep retained its mystery. As dawn approaches, the courtyard begins to change. The darkness thins. The walls release their cold breath. The stars withdraw one by one, like listeners satisfied with what they have heard. Sleep, too, begins to loosen its hold. The soul, if it wandered, finds its way back along invisible threads. Breath deepens, muscles stir. The night's gate closes quietly, leaving no mark to prove it was ever open. Nothing is answered fully. The sleeper shifts, suspended between worlds for a final moment. Then light touches the edge of the courtyard, pale and unannounced. Another day will begin, carrying work, hunger, voices, dust. The rituals of waking will replace those of rest. But something remains, a faint memory of having crossed somewhere ancient and unseen, a softness behind the eyes, a reverence for the darkness that taught them how to return. Sleep withdraws, as it always does, and the courtyard breathes again. Before the night fully settles, before silence gathers its weight, there is a small circle of lamplight pressed gently into darkness. The flame does not hurry, it trembles, breath by breath, as if aware that it is being watched. Beneath its glow, bread is broken by unseen hands. The sound is soft, a quiet tearing, almost a sigh. Crumbs fall onto packed earth, scattering like pale constellations, brief stars born and gone in the same moment. It is said that this was how eating began, not with hunger, but with reverence. In ancient Mesopotamia, food was never only food. Grain carried memory. Bread carried time. To eat was to touch the long patience of the land, shaped by sun and river, by flood and retreat, by waiting. Each loaf held within it the echo of fields once green, now dust, and the labor of hands that had pressed seeds into soil with faith rather than certainty. Beneath the silence of the evening meal, the world leaned closer. The lamp revealed bowls worn smooth by years of use. Clay vessels bore faint scars from fire and fingers. Nothing here was new. Everything had already lived a life before this moment. Eating unfolded slowly, as if speed itself would be disrespectful. The act was simple, yet it felt ceremonial, a quiet agreement between body and earth. Barley was the heart of it all. Whispers tell us it was the gift that bound people to place, to seasons, to one another. Barley became bread, and bread became offering. Dates followed, dark and sweet, carrying the concentrated warmth of the sun. Beer, thick and clouded, moved from vessel to vessel, shared not for excess but for balance. These were not luxuries, they were conversations. To eat was to listen. Smoke rose gently from warm food, curling like breath toward the unseen. It was believed that gods lingered there, just beyond the veil of steam and shadow, close enough to sense gratitude, distant enough to remain unknown. Meals were often quiet. Words, when spoken, were careful. Silence itself became a form of respect. Marked by the moon, the night meal held a different weight than the food of day. Darkness reminded everyone of fragility. Hunger was never far away. Famine lived at the edge of memory, a shadow that returned often enough to be feared, but not often enough to be forgotten. Clay tablets still speak of it, lists of rations reduced, offerings galleyed, years when the river did not rise as promised. Feasts and shortages sit side by side in those records, pressed into the same earth. Abundance and absence shared the same hand. This contradiction deepened the mystery of survival. Why did the land sometimes give freely and other times close itself without explanation? No one knew. The gods were said to decide, but even they seemed bound by patterns no one could fully name. Eating, then, was an act of humility. Each meal was accepted, not assumed. Beneath the silence, gratitude formed without words. The table, if it could be called that, was low. Food remained close to the ground, close to where it had come from. To eat was to bend downward, to remember origin. Children were taught early to respect bread. Dropped pieces were gathered, nothing was wasted without consequence. Crumbs were not refuse, they were reminders. The stars above remained distant and unmoved. They watched without judgment. Their cold light fell across courtyards and rooftops, across fields resting after harvest, across empty granaries and full ones alike. Generations ate beneath those same stars, unaware of how briefly they would be remembered. Where memory fades, ritual remains. The act of eating bound the living to the dead. Ancestors were believed to linger near familiar places, and meals were moments when their presence felt closest. Sometimes a small portion was set aside, not always formally, not always acknowledged, but felt, a gesture toward those who had once eaten here, who had once broken bread beneath the same sky. Grain, after all, was cyclical. It returned each year, or did not. It taught patience and loss in equal measure. To eat was to accept both. The sound of chewing softened into the night, bowls emptied slowly, hands paused often, resting, as if listening for something beyond the flame. The body warmed, hunger retreated, but awareness remained. Fullness did not bring forgetting, it brought stillness. It is said that overeating was frowned upon, not because of excess alone, but because it disrupted balance. To eat too quickly was to forget gratitude. To eat too slowly was to forget gratitude. Meals were meant to end gently, leaving room, not just in the body, but in the spirit. Clay tablets speak quietly of offerings made from daily food. Bread placed before small shrines, beer poured onto earth. These gestures blurred the line between survival and worship. The gods were fed not because they needed food, but because humans needed to remember who sustained whom. Beneath the silence, this understanding passed without instruction. As the meal neared its end, the lamp burned lower. Shadows lengthened, stretching across walls marked by age. The last bite was taken slowly, held for a moment before swallowing, as if acknowledging its journey. Bowls were set down with care. Nothing dramatic followed, no declaration, no closing prayer spoken aloud. Gratitude did not require noise. Above, the stars remained unchanged. They had seen this before. They would see it again, long after these hands were dust, long after these bowls were broken and buried. Eating continued across centuries, repeating itself with slight variations, always bound to the same quiet truths: that survival is borrowed, that abundance is temporary, that gratitude is the only lasting offering. The flame flickered, then steadied. Night deepened. Somewhere a dog moved in its sleep. Somewhere else grain rested in sacks, waiting for tomorrow. The land breathed in darkness, holding what it would give and what it would withhold. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. The meal ended not with satisfaction, but with humility. The body was nourished, the spirit was reminded. Above it all, the stars watched, distant and patient, as generations ate, forgot, and vanished, leaving behind only dust, silence, and the echo of bread broken beneath the night sky.
Before light remembers its name, before the sky loosens its grip on night, there is movement, not sound, not color, but motion. Water shifts in darkness. The river breathes while the world still sleeps. Its surface carries no reflection yet, only the faint suggestion of depth, of patience, of something older than counting. It is said that this was how morning began, not with bells or voices, not with commands or time kept in numbers, but with the river's quiet instruction. The Euphrates, the Tigris, names spoken later, carved into tablets and memory. In this hour, they are simply water, slow, deliberate, awake before all else. They move while stars still linger, while roofs and fields remain folded into shadow. Beneath the silence, the river teaches. It exhales against reeds, a soft brushing sound, barely there. It shifts its weight against banks shaped by centuries of return. This is the signal. Somewhere nearby, eyes open. Breath changes. Sleep loosens its hold, not because the sun has risen, but because the water has spoken. Morning, here, is not announced, it is felt. The river sets the cadence of waking life. It decides when feet touch earth, when hands reach for tools, when the body begins to belong to the day. To ignore it would be to step out of rhythm, a dangerous thing in a land where survival listens closely to patterns. As light begins to thin the dark, the river reveals itself slowly. A line of silver emerges, then color, clay red reflected faintly from distant banks, misty green where reeds lean inward, dusk blue fading into gold. The sky does not dominate the water, it learns from it. Where memory fades, the river remains. Daily labor gathered itself around this moving presence. Fields waited for its retreat. Canals followed its decisions. Paths bent toward it instinctively, as if drawn by something deeper than need. Work did not begin at an hour, it began at a sound, the sound of water touching earth in a certain way, the sound of flow easing or quickening. Flood and retreat were lessons written without words. When the river rose, it carried fertility and fear together. When it withdrew, it left behind dark silt, rich, silent, heavy with promise. Nothing was wasted. Everything was watched. People learned to read the river the way others read stars. A slow current meant one thing, a restless surface meant another. Even the smell of the air above the water could shape decisions. Morning was an interpretation, not a rule. The river did not repeat itself exactly, but it echoed enough to be trusted and feared. Beneath the silence, prayers formed. Clay tablets still remember them. Soft requests pressed into earth. May the flood come gently. May it not linger too long. May it not forget us this year. Predictable water was a blessing greater than gold. Too little meant hunger. Too much meant erasure. Myths gathered where certainty failed. Whispers tell us that gods lived within the rivers, not above them, that divine tempers moved beneath calm surfaces, unseen until they were felt. Stories spoke of sudden rage, of waters rising without warning, of cities learning humility in a single night. The river gave life, and it took it back, without explanation. And yet, each morning, people returned to it. Emotion drifted from wonder into dependence. The river was teacher, provider, threat, and mirror. To live beside it was to accept not knowing. To wake by it was to surrender control before the day even began. Morning sounds gathered gradually. Reeds stirred. Birds tested their voices. The river continued, indifferent to attention, faithful only to its own course. Its patience shaped tools, wooden plows worn smooth by years of use. baskets woven to carry what the water allowed to grow. A worker approached the bank as light strengthened. No name is needed. The figure remains distant, nearly swallowed by the scene. Tools rest against stone, shaped by hands that learned from repetition, from waiting. Before stepping fully into the day, there is a pause, a glance toward the water, not for permission, for alignment. Marked by the moon's retreat and the sun's approach, this moment held quiet power. The river answered nothing. It did not promise abundance or safety. It simply moved. Its surface broke around stones placed long ago, stones that would outlast generations. In this way, the river taught patience without kindness, endurance without comfort. Beneath the silence, this was understood. Cities rose where the river allowed. Cities fell when it withdrew or overwhelmed. The water remembered none of it. It carried fragments away, broken brick, lost tools, the dust of walls that once believed themselves permanent. Morning advanced. Light spilled across the banks. Shadows shortened. The river reflected sky now, but only briefly. Its true nature lay below the surface, unseen, unchanged by watching. The worker stepped forward, feet pressed into damp earth. The day began not with certainty, but with trust. Trust that the river's lesson would hold, at least for now. Perhaps it was never meant to be mastered. The river did not belong to them, they belonged to it. Waking was an act of listening. Labor was a response. Survival was a conversation carried out in silence. As the sun rose higher, the river continued its ancient task, teaching without speaking, sustaining without attachment. It did not look back. It did not wait. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The river flows.
Before the sun begins its slow descent, before shadows lengthen into thought, there is a room held in shade. Its doorway is narrow, its walls thick with age, built to keep the heat at bay and the world at a respectful distance. Inside, the air is cool and patient. Dust floats gently, suspended like memory itself. And somewhere within this stillness, looms begin to sing. Not loudly, not with urgency, they hum. It is said that this was how time learned to soften. Wooden frames stand upright, their surfaces polished smooth by years of touch. Threads stretch across them like quiet paths, pale and waiting, pulled taut between past and future. When the loom moves, the sound is steady, a low rhythm, almost breath-like. Back and forth, lift and settle, a repetition so complete it dissolves the edges of thought. Beneath the silence, work begins. Here, labor is not announced. It does not arrive with command or declaration. It simply resumes, as if it had never stopped. Fingers find their place without looking. The body remembers what the mind no longer needs to hold. Each motion follows another, not forward, but inward, drawing attention away from the day and into the small, precise universe between thread and hand. In ancient Mesopotamia, this was the afternoon's true domain. The sun outside pressed down upon courtyards and streets, slowing movement, quieting voices. Inside these shaded rooms, time folded gently into itself. Weaving, carving, shaping clay, each task became a vessel for stillness. The world narrowed, hours blurred. What mattered was rhythm. Marked by the moon's future rise and the sun's present weight, the worker's breath began to sync with motion. Inhale as the thread lifts, exhale as it settles. Over and over, the loom answered each breath with sound, not speech, but presence. Whispers tell us that this was trance without intention. No visions were sought, no gods summoned directly, yet something sacred gathered anyway. In repetition, identity thinned, names lost importance, even time loosened its grip. There was only motion and the quiet satisfaction of pattern forming where once there had been nothing. Cloth emerged slowly, line by line, carrying no story yet, only potential. A garment for warmth, a covering for sleep, an offering, or perhaps something destined to be buried alongside the dead, wrapped carefully around a body preparing for its final stillness. Threads did not know their purpose, they simply became. Beneath the silence, this was enough. Clay tablets tell us that such labor was common, daily, expected. Rations were given according to output, lists were kept, names were recorded. Systems of hierarchy pressed quietly against the calm surface of craft. Not everyone wove for themselves. Many wove for temples, for storehouses, for unseen authorities who measured worth in numbers and knots. This is where the ache enters. The stillness of the loom did not erase control. It softened its edges, perhaps, but it remained. Behind the meditative rhythm lay rules: how much could be taken, how much must be given, when hands were allowed to rest. The loom sang, but it also counted. Contradiction lived here, woven tightly into the fabric itself. To work was to surrender, and to surrender was sometimes enforced. The trance offered relief, but not freedom. And yet, within that narrow space, something human endured, a quiet reclaiming of breath, of focus, of presence. Where memory fades, rhythm remains. Other crafts joined the looms in this afternoon hush. Clay was shaped on slow-turning wheels, vessels rising from wet earth under steady palms. Stone was carved carefully, each strike measured, each pause deliberate. These acts required patience, and patience shaped the spirit in return. Dust gathered on floors, undisturbed. Light filtered in through high openings, softened by hanging cloth, turning gold into something gentler. Sunbeams caught drifting particles, making the air itself feel textured, alive. It is said that the afternoon was when the gods listened least, and perhaps that is why the work felt so intimate. Without divine scrutiny, hands moved honestly, breath deepened, thought dissolved into motion. The loom's song continued. Outside, the world waited. Inside, time bent. The worker did not think of beginnings or endings. There was only the next movement, and the one after that. Thread crossed thread, pattern emerged, not through inspiration, but through persistence, beauty born of staying. Beneath the silence, this was devotion without altar. Yet the body remembered its limits. Shoulders tightened, fingers ached. The trance was gentle, not infinite. As light shifted, as the sun leaned lower, the loom's voice softened, the rhythm slowed almost imperceptibly, like a heart preparing for rest. Unfinished threads hung loosely suspended mid-thought. This was not failure, it was understanding. Work did not end, it paused, just as rivers retreat only to return, just as sleep comes without finality. The loom rested, knowing it would sing again. The pattern would wait. Time had already learned patience here. As the room darkened, the loom fell quiet, dust settled, breath returned to awareness. The worker stepped back, not to admire, but to release. What had been shaped remained, held gently by silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be completed in one sitting. Outside, shadows stretched long across stone. Evening prepared its rituals. Lamps would be lit, meals shared, sleep invited. But within this room, the afternoon lingered just a moment longer, echoing softly in the threads. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The loom does not sing forever, but its song remains, woven into what endures. At the hour when the sun forgets how to move, the world holds still. The sky is pale and wide, emptied of clouds. Light descends without mercy, pressing itself onto stone and skin alike. In the center of the city rises the ziggurat, tier upon tier of baked earth and belief, its steps stacked like frozen prayers. At midday, its shadow is short, drawn close to its body, as if even darkness has nowhere to rest. It is said that this is the moment when stone listens. Work slows, then pauses. Tools are set down gently, not dropped. Hands lift away from clay, from rope, from grain. The air thickens with heat, and breath becomes deliberate. Even sound seems reluctant to travel far. The ziggurat stands unmoved, absorbing the sun, watching without eyes. Beneath the silence, time bends inward. The ziggurat was never merely a building, it was a presence. Its mass reshaped the day, dividing hours not by numbers, but by shadow and glare. Morning belonged to movement, evening to return. Midday, this suspended hour, belonged to the gods. Sacred architecture ordered life without speaking. Paths curved around the ziggurat instinctively, as if drawn by gravity. Streets aligned themselves to its base. Homes leaned toward it, never away. Children learned its outline before they learned their own names. It rose above markets, workshops, and courtyards, reminding everyone below that something larger watched quietly from above. Yet it was rarely climbed. Whispers tell us that only priests and select attendants ascended its terraces with any regularity. For most, the upper levels remained distant, unreachable, softened by heat and light. The gods were said to dwell at the summit, but the summit itself seemed to hover between earth and sky, belonging fully to neither. Marked by the moon at night and by the sun at noon, the ziggurat bridged worlds without allowing passage. At midday, its surfaces glowed, clay red turning pale, sandstone yellow, nearly white. The heat pressed down so firmly that even thought felt slowed. This was not a time for prayer spoken aloud. It was a time for quiet acknowledgement. The gods were closest now, but also most remote. Beneath the silence, awe settled into distance. Inscriptions carved into stone promised protection, abundance, favor. Names of deities were etched carefully, their curves and lines meant to endure longer than flesh. Offerings were listed, rituals described, confidence pressed into clay. And yet, history tells another story. Cities fell, floods came too strong or not at all. Fires erased neighborhoods. empires shifted, collapsed, were buried. The ziggurat remained standing, sometimes damaged, sometimes repaired, always watching ruin unfold at its feet. This contradiction lingered like heat on skin. If the gods dwelled above, why did suffering persist below? Why did promises carved in stone not prevent dust from reclaiming walls? No tablet answered fully. No ritual resolved the question. Perhaps the ziggurat was not meant to protect, only to witness. At midday, this uncertainty felt sharpest. The gods were near enough to imagine, yet too far to reach. The structure's height emphasized the distance. Each tier lifted belief upward, while human life remained firmly grounded, bound to thirst and labor. Beneath the silence, resignation grew. Workers sought shade at the base of the structure, their small shadows pressed close to stone. The ziggurat offered no comfort, only presence. Its surface radiated heat slowly, deliberately, as if reminding those below of endurance rather than mercy. The sun stood directly above now, shadows nearly vanished, the city flattened into light. In this hour, prayer was internal, thought turned inward like water seeking depth beneath glare. Breath slowed, movement ceased, the world waited. Where memory fades, stone remains. Generations passed through this same hour, standing beneath the same mass of earth and intention. Different languages named the same gods. Different rulers claimed divine favor from the same height. The ziggurat absorbed them all, indifferent to banners and names. Dust gathered in its crevices. Wind softened its edges. Still it stood. As the sun began its slow descent, the first hint of shadow returned. Lines stretched outward from the base, lengthening across the ground like waking limbs. With shadow came permission to move again. Tools were lifted, work resumed, the spell loosened. But the ziggurat did not change. It remained, patient as centuries, holding the memory of every midday pause, every unanswered question, every silent acknowledgement of power both present and unreachable. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. As afternoon edged toward evening, the structure's shadow grew long, reaching into streets and doorways, touching places it had not touched since morning. The city breathed again, sound returned, life flowed on. The ziggurat watched. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and stone at midday listens longer than we do. Before memory learned to speak, it learned to wait. In a quiet corner of the city, where the sun had not yet reached, wet clay rested in a shallow tray. It was cool to the touch, heavy with water and earth. A reed stylus hovered above it, trembling slightly, as if aware of what it was about to do. One press, then another. Lines formed, not beautiful, not grand, but deliberate. Each mark pressed breath into matter. It is said that this was how a day learned to survive. The tablet did not record epics or battles. It did not speak of kings or gods. It held rations, names, numbers, a count of grain, a measure of oil. Simple things, written without ceremony. Yet in this humble surface, time folded inward. What would have vanished with the setting sun remained, held gently by clay. Beneath the silence, memory took shape. Writing in ancient Mesopotamia was labor, not performance. It belonged to rooms where dust gathered quietly, where light entered through narrow openings, softened by hanging cloth. The scribe's hand moved steadily, guided by training and repetition. Each sign required pressure, angle, restraint. Too deep, and the clay would crack. Too light, and the meaning would fade. The tablet listened. To mark clay was to resist forgetting. It was an act of faith. Faith that someone, someday, would care enough to read, that the future would pause long enough to notice the shape of a day long gone. Scrolls could burn, voices could scatter, but clay, once dried, remembered differently. Most tablets spoke of routine. Deliveries made, portions distributed, work assigned, days counted. There is a quiet tenderness in this sameness. These records were never meant to inspire, they were meant to ensure continuity, that tomorrow would resemble today closely enough to be understood. Where memory fades, routine remains. Names appear briefly in these tablets, then disappear forever. A worker receives barley, another is marked absent, someone is owed oil, someone else has fulfilled their measure. We know these details, but we do not know their laughter, their grief, their private thoughts as they slept beneath the same stars. The contradiction rests gently here. The tablets survive, the voices do not. We know what was given, but not how it was received. We know the count, but not the weight it carried. Did the grain bring relief? Did it fall short? Did the hand that received it tremble with hunger or gratitude? The clay does not say. And yet, something human remains. The stylus lifts, another mark. The scribe pauses, breath aligning with thought. Writing was not hurried. Even in routine there was care. Each tablet was a small act of trust placed into the world. Not all were fired. Many were simply left to dry, set aside in shade, stacked with others like it, days layered upon days. Marked by the moon, the tablets aged quietly. Some were broken accidentally, others were buried by collapse or flood. Many were lost, their stories dissolved back into earth. But some endured, sheltered by ruins, preserved by disaster, waiting. It is said that fire remembered them best. When cities burned, the heat hardened unfired clay, turning fragile records into stone-like witnesses. Destruction became preservation. In this reversal, history hid its irony. What was never meant to last became what remained. Beneath the silence, this feels almost intentional. The tablets do not boast. They do not explain themselves. They sit quietly in museums now, under glass, their surfaces cracked, their edges softened. Scholars lean close, tracing signs with careful eyes. They translate what they can. They reconstruct systems. They map economies and hierarchies. But something is always missing. The sound of the room, the smell of damp clay, the pause before the final mark. Writing was both sacred and ordinary. It bound people to structure, to authority, to memory beyond the self. It was a discipline, taught carefully, guarded closely. Not everyone could write. Those who could held a strange power, not to command, but to remember on behalf of others. Beneath the silence, this was understood. A tablet could outlive a person. It could travel further than a voice. It could wait. As the day wore on, the tablet was set aside. Sunlight crept closer, but did not touch it directly. Too much heat would warp it. Patience was required even after the writing was done. The tablet needed time to become itself. Dust settled gently on its surface. Around it, life continued. Voices rose and fell. Tools clinked. The river moved. The sun crossed the sky. None of this entered the clay. It remained focused on its narrow task, to remember only what it was given. Perhaps that is why it endured. As shadows lengthened, the tablet dried. The surface lightened in color, from dark wet earth to pale clay red. The marks remained, now fixed, unchangeable. The day it recorded was already passing, dissolving into night. But the tablet stayed. It waited through seasons, through silence, through collapse. It waited while the city around it changed shape, while walls crumbled, while names were forgotten. It waited while sand crept inward, while roofs fell, while time thickened. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Millennia later, hands uncovered it again. Different hands, different breath. The tablet emerged into light once more, carrying a day no one remembered, preserved without knowing why. Perhaps it was never meant to be read, only to exist. The clay tablet remembered a day, and in doing so, it reminds us how quietly history survives. Before night gathers its first breath, there is a moment when the world exhales. It is said that this moment belongs to the marketplace. The sun has begun its slow descent, no longer sharp, no longer demanding. Light softens against stone walls and woven canopies. Shadows stretch and loosen their grip. Beneath this changing sky, the market still lives, but quietly now, as if aware that time is folding inward. Low voices drift like dust, not raised, not urgent, simple exchanges, measured and calm. A basket of grain tipped gently into waiting hands, oil poured with care, its surface catching the last gold of the day. Nothing rushes, nothing insists. Here, before dusk, the world remembers how to speak softly. The marketplace is not merely a place of trade, it is a chamber of breath. Goods move hand to hand the way air moves between lungs, unseen, necessary, shared. Dates, barley, wool, clay vessels darkened by use. Each object carries a history of touch. Each has passed through other days, other mornings shaped by river light and labor. Beneath the silence, connection hums. Whispers tell us that in ancient cities, markets were the heart's slow pulse. Not conquest, not decree, but exchange. The recognition that no one stands alone. One brings what another lacks. One receives what another releases. In this way, survival becomes communal, woven from countless small gestures. Yet even here, gentleness carries weight. The stalls are not equal. Some overflow, heavy with abundance.
Others offer little, their wares thinly spread. Hierarchies settle invisibly, like dust on woven mats. Records speak of prices fixed by power, of rations controlled, of debts that lingered long after voices fell silent. Still, the market endures, not because it is fair, but because it is necessary. Stone walls rise around it, catching echoes of countless afternoons. Above, sacred towers watch without speaking. The gods are never far, yet never close enough to touch. Their presence is felt in the careful measures, the oaths spoken softly, the fear of imbalance. Marked by the moon, trade becomes ritual. Time here is not counted by numbers, but by light. When shadows grow long enough to touch the edges of stalls, transactions slow. Fingers linger on baskets, words soften further. Even disagreement loses its edge, dulled by the approaching night. Emotion drifts, almost unnoticed, from warmth into something quieter. There is comfort in this closeness, the shared air, the mutual dependence. And yet, beneath it, a knowledge persists. This will not last. Markets fade, cities crumble. The hands that trade today will one day be dust. Empires dissolve without ceremony. Beneath the silence, history breathes differently. Archaeology uncovers streets once lined with stalls, now empty corridors of stone. The laughter, the bargaining, the murmured prayers, all gone. Only fragments remain, weights, broken vessels, coins worn smooth by countless exchanges. These objects do not tell us who was kind or who was desperate. They do not reveal which trades were made with hope and which with fear. They remember motion, not meaning. Where memory fades, melancholy grows gentle. The market before dusk carries this awareness without naming it. Perhaps those who stood here felt it too, a subtle ache beneath the calm, the sense that everything held is already slipping, that abundance is temporary, that balance is fragile. And yet, they stayed. They traded, they spoke, they lingered. As the sun lowers further, stalls begin to empty. Cloths are folded carefully, baskets lighten, footsteps soften, turning toward narrow streets that lead home. The air cools, carrying the scent of grain and oil and earth. Dust rises briefly, then settles. No announcement marks the closing, no final bell. The market dissolves the way breath does, quietly, naturally, without resistance. What was full becomes open space once more. Stone remains. Silence returns. Perhaps it was never meant to last, only to repeat. Tomorrow, light will return. Voices will gather again, goods will pass hand to hand. The same gestures will be performed by different bodies, under the same sky, beneath the same watching towers. But for now, dusk claims its due. The marketplace rests, and beneath the settling dust, the memory of connection lingers, fragile, unfinished, waiting. It is said that night does not arrive all at once. It enters by degrees, the way memory does. A single lamp is lit, then another. Small flames bloom against the deepening blue, their glow touching clay walls, low tables, bowls worn smooth by years of hands returning to the same place. Outside, the sky darkens gently, not as threat, but as reminder.
the sun withdraws without ceremony. What remains is warmth, gathered inward. This is the hour of return. Beneath the silence, families draw close, not in urgency, but instinct. The evening meal waits, simple and sufficient. Bread rests where it has always rested. Stew releases a quiet breath of heat. Oil catches the lamplight like a held prayer. Darkness presses at the edges of the courtyard, patient, listening. Here, eating is not merely nourishment, it is closure, a binding of daylight into memory. The world beyond the walls grows indistinct. Inside, the circle tightens. The night has begun its work. Whispers tell us that in ancient cities, evening reshaped the human shape of time. Day belonged to labor, to river, loom, tablet, stone, but night belonged to something older, less certain. When the sun vanished, the rules softened, vision narrowed, sound deepened, the unseen stepped closer. To eat at dusk was to prepare for that nearness. Lamps were lit carefully, one by one, as if each flame were in agreement. Light here was not abundance, it was defense. The dark beyond the threshold was believed to carry more than absence. It was inhabited by spirits that wandered, by gods who listened more closely at night, by ancestors whose names no longer answered to daylight. Marked by the moon, the evening meal became a shield. Food was shared slowly, not because time was plentiful, but because haste felt dangerous. Silence carried weight. Words were chosen with care, spoken softly, as if not to attract attention from what waited beyond the walls. Children were drawn closer, elders spoke less, breath itself seemed louder. Night changed how people moved, how they watched, how they believed. Tablets tell us that prayers spoken at dusk, small invocations for protection, for dreams undisturbed, for doors that would remain closed until morning. These were not grand ceremonies, but murmurs woven into routine, folded invisibly into daily survival. To eat together was to say, "We are still here." Beneath the silence, fear and comfort shared the same bowl. The evening meal also marked transition, from visibility to concealment. Tools were set aside, work released its hold. Hands that had shaped clay or grain now rested, momentarily empty. Identity softened. One was no longer laborer or scribe or carrier of burdens, but simply present. Yet presence carried vulnerability. Darkness did not only hide danger, it invited reflection. In the lamplight, shadows lengthened and shifted, bending walls into unfamiliar shapes. The known became strange. Stories emerged, not as entertainment, but as mapping. Tales of gods who walked at night, of warnings disguised as dreams, of cities that ignored signs and vanished beneath dust. Where memory fades, myth steps forward. Night asked questions daylight did not. What watches us when we sleep? What leaves the body when breath slows? What listens when lamps go out? It is said that dreams were not trusted blindly. They were weighed, debated, sometimes feared. The evening meal was preparation not just for sleep, but for encounter. The soul loosened by darkness was believed to wander and might not always return easily. Thus, gratitude accompanied caution. The final bites were taken deliberately. Bowls were cleared, but not hurried. Lamps were adjusted, their wicks trimmed low. Every gesture carried meaning, learned through repetition across generations. Outside, the city quieted, gates closed, streets emptied. The marketplace that breathed so fully before dusk now lay open and exposed, its energy withdrawn like a tide. Stone listened.
Emotion shifted almost imperceptibly, from warmth into alertness, from togetherness into watchfulness. The same walls that offered shelter also trapped sound. Every creak, every distant call traveled farther in the night. Yet still, people stayed close, because night was not only danger, it was also intimacy. Stories spoken in lamplight were softer, closer, shaped by shared breath. Truths emerged that daylight crowded out. Grief surfaced, gratitude lingered. The meal anchored these moments, giving them weight and place. Beneath the silence, humanity revealed itself, fragile, communal, unfinished. Records speak of curfews, of laws restricting movement after dark. Control tightened when vision failed. Power preferred light. The night belonged to uncertainty, and uncertainty unsettled authority. Yet no decree could erase the darkness. So people adapted. They learned to listen more carefully, to trust routine, to read the smallest signs, a flickering flame, a sudden chill, a silence too deep. The evening meal taught patience, it taught presence, it taught acceptance of limits. Above the city, stars emerged, distant, unmoved, watching the quiet rituals unfold. They had seen this before. They would see it again. Generations would eat, lamps would glow, darkness would return. As the night deepens, lamps dim. One by one, flames surrender height, shrinking into steady embers. The room grows quieter, its edges dissolving into shadow. What remains visible feels chosen, a bowl, a wall, a breath. Words thin out, stories end without conclusion. Perhaps it was never meant to be finished. Bodies settle. The final lamp is lowered, not extinguished, but reduced to a small, watchful glow. Darkness fills the spaces left behind, not rushing, but arriving as it always does, gently, completely. Outside, the city sleeps unevenly. Inside, breath slows. Nothing is resolved, nothing is answered. The evening meal has done its work. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some rituals exist only to remind us that night will come, and we will meet it together for a while. Then, silence. It is said that dreams come not as stories, but as whispers. They drift, edgeless and silent, like dust caught in a sunbeam, hovering just beyond the reach of waking eyes. Imagine a gate standing alone in the desert, its frame cracked, weathered, marked by time and silence, veiled in a soft haze of heat and shadow. The air trembles as if holding its breath, waiting for a name lost to memory, a secret buried beneath shifting sands. Beneath this gate, the night does not sleep, but stirs. Symbols, unformed and shifting, glide through the darkness, spirals, stars, faint marks written not on stone, but on breath, traces of gods exhaling their presence into a restless mind. Here, within this trembling threshold between sleep and waking, the dream is already taking shape, fluid, sacred, and strange. Whispers tell us that in ancient times the dream was a doorway, not only to the night, but to worlds beyond sight and reason. Dreams were not idle fancies, but messages, etched in the breath of gods, carried on the invisible currents between earth and sky. It is said to dream was to speak without words, to read without letters, to listen without sound. In the quiet chambers of the heart, the dreamer was both priest and patient, woven into a ritual of daily life where sleep became an act of seeking. Dreams came as riddles, neither fully known nor forgotten, blessings wrapped in mystery, warnings cloaked in shadow. Beneath the silence, scrolls remain, not carved in clay, but written in symbols too subtle for the daylight, folded within the breath, the pause, the flutter between heartbeat and thought. The dream was a sacred cipher held between fear and hope. It promised insight, yet offered no certainty, like the stars that flicker just beyond the horizon's edge, their light both ancient and unknowable.
Some voices say that kings and commoners alike laid themselves bare before dreams, seeking counsel in their fleeting shapes. Priests would interpret, reading the unspoken language of breath and vision, guiding decisions without speaking names, blending belief and intuition into acts of quiet reverence. Yet the dream remained elusive, a presence that could not be grasped or tamed, only honored and watched. Stories speak of nights spent tracing patterns in the darkness, attempting to unfold what was folded in silence, to unravel the spiral that wound inward without end. But clarity slipped through like water, and meaning danced just out of reach. Emotion flows here like a slow river, from wonder at the sacred unknown to uncertainty that deepens with every fading shape. The dream offers no answers, only questions. It is said that beneath the silence, beneath the breath, where memory fades, dreams dissolve like mist at dawn, marked by the moon, then lost to the light of day. And so the dream retreats. The symbols scatter, faint echoes in a waking mind, a spiral drawn in dust, a star's last glimmer before it vanishes. The gate in the desert remains, silent and waiting, bearing the weight of unspoken names, unseen faces, forgotten rites. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, this sacred breath, this elusive vision. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some dreams return only to those who let them go. The breath slows, the shadows thin. Sleep dissolves into dawn, and the dream becomes the silence beneath waking. It is said that there is a silence unlike any other, the silence that stretches just before the first breath of dawn, when the world holds its quiet breath in the fragile pause between night and day. Imagine a city, ancient and vast, resting beneath a veil of stars, its walls crumbled, its gates closed, bathed in the soft shadow of a sleeping moon. The air is thick with stillness, thick as dust settling on stone and clay, as if time itself has pressed a gentle finger to its lips, inviting only whispers, faint echoes of footsteps long gone, names buried beneath the sand, stories folded in the cool desert air. Beneath this sacred hush, beneath the weight of countless suns and moons, there is a pause, a breath held in the lungs of the earth itself, waiting for the light to return, yet reluctant to let go of the night. Whispers tell us that within this fragile silence, life's great tapestry folds itself into a single, delicate moment. It is said that every dawn carries the memory of all that came before, the labor of hands shaping stone and earth, the breaking of bread beneath low lamplight, the quiet prayer spoken without sound, the soft murmur of dreams dissolving with sleep. Beneath the silence, the city is a palimpsest, layers of existence written one upon the other, each breath of wind a page turned, each grain of dust a word etched in the language of time. Here, labor and belief entwine in a sacred dance, the rhythm of daily toil folding seamlessly into ritual, the echoes of footsteps merging with the murmur of prayers, all held within the fragile arc between dusk and dawn. It is said that even in the darkest nights, life persists, not with the loud triumph of victory, but with the quiet resilience of continuing. The city listens as the earth turns beneath the stars, bearing witness to the endless cycle of hunger and plenty, of hope and despair, etched in the lines of worn faces now vanished. Beneath the silence, scrolls of memory unravel, not of kings and conquerors, but of the ordinary, the unseen, the breath of a child held close, the grain stored for winter, the soft steps of a woman returning home. Yet all remains unspoken, held just beyond the reach of words or meaning. Here lies the paradox, the certainty of repetition, and the fragile uncertainty of each day's survival. The knowledge that life repeats, unchanged yet utterly new, like waves that wash the shore, leaving behind shells and shadows. It is said that the city, though crumbled, never truly sleeps. It breathes beneath the stars, marked by the moon, its heart pulsing in the echo of lives once lived. And so the last silence before morning stretches on. The dust settles softly upon broken stone, the echoes of voices fade into the cool air, and the world prepares to awaken once more. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood, this quiet moment that holds all beginnings and endings. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some silences only speak when we surrender to their embrace. The night folds gently into day, and the city, ancient and patient, remains unmoved, waiting beneath the growing light, a breath held between worlds, a story whispered softly, where memory fades and dreams begin again. And so, The quiet lives of ancient Mesopotamia fade softly into the distance. The mud brick homes grow still, the hearth fires dim, and the long riverbanks rest beneath the stars. The people we visited tonight return to their sleep, their simple routines complete, their world continuing slowly without us. If you're still awake, you may stay here a while longer, floating gently between thoughts, or you may drift off now, carried by the calm rhythm of the past. Thank you for spending this peaceful time with Twilight Tale. May your rest be deep, your dreams quiet, and your night beautifully slow. Good night.